This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence, and in this series, we are exploring coaching outdoors and how being outdoors is good, if not vital, for our well-being. I'm talking to thought leaders and individuals who share their passion for coaching as they share their philosophy, research and practices with you. Our aim is to inspire you to unlock the potential of coaching when combined with being in nature and outdoors. My guest today is an executive coach and nature connection guide. And in our conversation today, we're going to explore coaching in urban settings. Working with professionals who are looking to go beyond daydreaming about the what-ifs, and for those interested in discovering new perspectives and possibilities in partnership with nature, Sam Wright combines her scientific background with the wisdom and intuition of nature, working on the inside, outside. So I'm delighted to introduce to you today, Sam Wright. Sam, a very warm welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Rob. It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. So let's start here. What does coaching outdoors mean to you, and why coaching outdoors?
Oh, two massive questions. What does coaching outdoors mean to me? It means everything to me. It's not the everything in that I coach both inside and outside, obviously, but it's very important as to who I am and how I show up as that coach if I can get outside with my clients. There's a unique difference. It's multidimensional, I feel like, as a coaching experience. Often things that you can't tangibly explain or put your finger on, but things happen when you're outside, which don't always or might take longer to happen inside. I bring my best self to being that coach, so serving those clients when I've stepped outside. And that's where I've noticed over the years that I am truest to myself, where I am most intuitive, be it as individually for my own kind of thinking through problems or actually perceiving others. Nature has been there for me through thick and thin. It's like a very old friend who I don't have to explain myself to. And so it's there always holding that space with me. And through the years, I've cultured up a saying, which I use a lot, in that nature is my business partner. We've been doing this together now for 8 years officially, and of course, my lifetime unofficially. So it means everything, actually, to me.
That's fascinating. And I'd love to get more into that relationship that you're beginning to describe there today, Sam. You've got a fascinating background. I know that you are a scientist. Tell me more about that and how you've arrived at coaching outdoors.
I'll keep it brief, but yes, you're right. I mean, I did a science degree. I was at King's. I did a degree in biology with zoology, found it fascinating, and really wanted to apply the kind of, I think it's not necessarily what you learn, but it's how to analyze data, to categorize things, to explain things clearly, to just, the way that you document and deal with empirical data. And that became really important as to how can I apply this in my career. Then went through often the struggles of what do you do with this when you finish your degree, and ended up in pharmaceuticals. So I was in a major blue chip for many years and worked my way through the ranks. I was in the research and development side of things, working in diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, pulmonary arterial hypertension, lots of different areas. And lots of it was about, analysing and applying, understanding and communicating that data, but also fundamentally, as you find in every walk of life, your key job is to get the best out of different departments and different people and different teams. So that's where I found I became most alive, really, in the relationships that you build in your work environment and the challenges that brings, but also the nuances of noticing. I could see someone walk across the floor plate and appreciate, I was thinking there's something not quite right there, I must check in with them. Not really understanding myself in any of this, just realizing that was important to me. And life has its curveballs, and there were quite some biggies that came my way. And so eventually that actually took me away from the blue chips and the pharmaceutical avenue. And I had the opportunity to travel a fair amount over a number of years for different reasons and bringing up a young family. So then I was in that kind of crossroads. I think many of us find ourselves in transition of, well, what do I do now? I've got so much to offer, but where am I really going to add value? What's my purpose here? You start bringing in all these massive life questions when you hit your 30s or whatever it is, or 40s, and go, is this it? So that's where I was. And so I decided, after a lot of self-inquiry and a lot of self-assessment and work, to retrain as a coach and take that experience that I had of heavy-duty career and then bring it as much as I can into my everyday right now. But the piece that was the biggie for me was this nature piece, in that it never let me down. Humans tend to have a tendency of different times in life potentially not showing up for you, but nature has always been there. And I just noticed that that's what I had to bring together, was this new coaching passion and this nature piece were fundamental. And then it was working out how to do that.
Wow, so much to get into there. I love this concept of nature being your business partner that you mentioned earlier. And I'm hearing it arise again there in your journey, in terms of nature always being there for you. And I also heard in there some really big life transitions, which is something I know that you help people with. And there may be some listeners listening to this today that can also recognize elements of themselves, perhaps in some of those big transitions, moving from a corporate world into something different. And I love this journey that you're describing there of, it almost sounds like you were following some kind of calling there. So I'd love to just tap into a little bit more to your relationship with nature and this idea of nature being your business partner and also nature always being there for you. Tell me more about that, Sam. That sounds fascinating to me.
Okay, so again, to keep it kind of like a synopsis, because we could go down lots of rabbit holes here, and I willingly would do so, but for your listeners.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, nature always being there for me. I think one of the key things is not realizing until you're much older where certain environments showed up for you. I've used that term again. I know that whenever I was feeling stressed as a child, for various different reasons, I would take myself unbeknownstly, unconsciously out for the walk. And there I would actively relax and breathe. Then bring that into adult life. And I noticed that even in the corporate world, when I walked across, there used to be an outside quad that we'd walk across to get to the canteen. And whatever had been going on that morning, stress, it was high pressure, high stress, budgets, emails, you name it. I would notice myself in my body physically shifting just for that short walk, and then transitioning to many different countries over a decade. What was always easy for me, where I found it easiest to be myself, to just check in, to ground in, to learn about how this new environment feels, was to go for walks and notice the landscape. And rather than remember where the McDonald's is on the corner, I'd say, oh, there's the big oak trees there. And that's my kind of, when I'm driving around the grid system in Canada, for instance, it would be the trees or the view that I would use as my reference markers. So this is what I mean. It's just always there, ready to hold my hand when I'm feeling lonely, to support me when I need a lift, to hold my tears if I need to cry. It's never judging you, and it's always willing.
Wow. Never judging, always willing. So how does this show up with your work when working with others? So I'm curious as to when and how people present themselves to you, Sam, and what journey, for example, you might take them on.
So it is interesting because I've not done, and I probably should do, lots of how did you find me? Where did you come across? I don't do that. I just accept that they're there, and that's enough. What often they do mention is the fact, I liked the nature aspects to your profile or something like that they've seen. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're really naturey people, as in they might just be interested and curious. wherever possible. So locally to where I live, but also taking it into London or to any other kind of place nearby. I will invite a client to try to join me on a one-to-one outside of their office block or of their house or their home office, whatever it is. Now, it doesn't have to be every session, but I really encourage, and often, obviously, some clients are long distance. I can't drive down to Cornwall. I can't pop over to Switzerland, but there is opportunity. And what we do is we walk together. I follow all the ICH guidelines. I do the contracting as a good coach will. All of the training aspects, none of it differs. It all comes out into a coaching session, a regular coaching session. The difference being is that I take them outside. And in that moment, just in that action, I feel people get more to their experience, be it whether they realize it or not, because nature is in the background just doing its magic, its alchemy on this human being and on me at the same time. So yeah, we will walk for an hour. I might meet someone in the car park or in the London park, and we will ground in. We'll be present in this moment and then take it from there. You know, what does the client want from this session? They're in the driving seat, as we all know. They are in command of that coaching session. And at no time do I have an agenda. We will go around this way in the park. Even that's an incredible question to start a coaching session of, which way do you want to go? And in that moment, they are taking control. If they've lost control all morning or all afternoon, it's right, I'm in control. My body's telling me I want to go this way.
So I'm hearing a load of things in there. My ears picked up when you mentioned London. So we're talking about coaching in urban areas with nature as a co-partner, as part of this coaching relationship, and doing its work not just on and with the client, but with you too, Sam, and supporting you as the coach there. And I imagine for those coaches that are listening to this, they'll recognize the practice of contracting. And as you mentioned, there's aspects to this which is probably any coach might be able to relate to or recognize. But there's also this element of actually being outside of the four walls, or being on a Zoom call, as it is for a lot of coaches these days. And I'm really curious as to what else goes on in those coaching, let's call them conversations, but probably sessions. For you, Sam, I know one of the things you're recognised for is helping people to slow down a bit. I was just wondering if you've got any examples or stories of where that's been a feature, I suppose, of a coaching relationship that you've had.
Yeah, I do have an example that's just popped into my head actually when you were speaking, Rob, but I do want to mention something that is not under our control, which I think is so fundamentally important to this conversation or to the experiential experience of this coaching sessions, is that when we step outside into our, what I would call our kind of natural habitat, more natural habitat, whether it's in London or in Sheffield, it doesn't matter. But if you're outside by something more open, say a park, you've got those sentient beings in that park, those trees that have heard so much, have experienced so much over the years. But you've got what I feel is like a natural happiness hack going on. We all know that not all coaching sessions are joy and elation, but fundamentally what nature's supporting us with are deeper breaths as we step out, and we can help in a grounding moment of, I need 5 breaths, will you join me? It's an invitation, you don't have to. I'm just going to take some breaths right now to get that oxygen that we've been sitting at our desk all crunched up, and get that deeper into our lungs. If we're outside by fir trees, they're often giving off natural phytoncides. All these things are happening to us. Our cortisol is lowering as we look at the branches of a tree, as we watch the clouds go by. Our heart rate's reducing. Our parasympathetic nervous system is initiating. We are getting kind of turned on by nature in a positive, healthy way. And so we notice that the stress is reducing, even if temporarily. And we begin, therefore, to access, I feel, areas of more clarity, of more productivity, of less rumination, more outward, greater perspective than if we're looking down at the floor and looking around and feeling awkward, sometimes in a closed box environment, particularly if your colleagues are walking past the windows, etc. So it's just taking the body and the mind, but taking that body physically outside is offering so much that is unsaid and often unfelt because we ignore it. But if we take a moment to acknowledge it and notice, then things become more relevant, more pertinent. And then to think about a session where it's really been profound. Got a client in mind where they turned up, they were in a hurry, they had been late, turned up stressed, and all of this energy was very apparent because I'd been there for 5 minutes before them and had the opportunity to decompress a little bit. I want to do that so I can offer my observations immediately. I'm on the ground effectively running. And they were just off. They were walking so fast. And I'm a fast walker. I've got a steady pace and, I'm often told to slow down. But this client in particular was just like off. And I was like, hey, have you noticed anything that's going on here? And they were like, yeah, I can't walk slow. I was like, okay, that's okay. So how about we just walk together? So the session went on and we got more curious and, as you do, asking more questions, on and on and on. So at the end of the session, when you're trying to kind of embody everything that you get them to inquire in, what's the insights, if anything, you've gained from this hour? And they listed loads out. And I said, there's one more that I'm curious from my perspective if you've observed. And they were like, oh no, please tell me. And I was like, we really slowed down. In that moment, the light bulb just switched and they were like, oh yeah, I can walk slower. And whilst that seems so basic, it was so profound to them in that moment. And she just took a huge deep breath and was like, yeah, I really need this space. And just to honour that moment, no matter what went on in the session, for her to realise that giving herself 60 minutes in a busy day was fundamental to her ongoing productivity, her ongoing resilience and ability to serve those that she needs to in her best way possible. And I just think so many people, we all struggle, I know myself included, when we're at our absolute maxed out busiest, we don't do the things that will really help us in the moment because we tell ourselves we don't have the time. We tell ourselves we can't journal. We tell ourselves we can't step outside for 2 minutes. And yet we fundamentally can. And it will mean that whatever we're doing next will take half the time.
So what I was hearing there was a really almost simple but deeply profound experience of you working with somebody. And it brings to mind actually simple things that we can observe as coaches, just as, for example, I think one of my takeaways already from our conversation today with you, Sam, is just the pace that we walk can perhaps be an indicator to how fast our thinking or how fast our thoughts are flowing through our mind. And just the experience of slowing our pace down, as you experienced with that particular client, can actually help us to affect essentially the speed at which we're thinking. So that's a really, really practical, insightful thought right there. And I'm also thinking about what you were saying about for those that have really busy days and the stories that we tell ourselves about whether we've got the time to do these things and the importance of finding the time to do these things. And I'm also wondering too about how much time we spend out in nature as well, and actually benefiting from that relationship with nature, as you've touched upon already there. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about some of the other challenges, or maybe other examples of those challenges that we're beginning to touch upon there, Sam, in terms of your experience and how you work with people to help them perhaps shift their way of being when they do have very busy, stressful lives. And I'm thinking now also about people, particularly for some reason, people in the city seem to come to mind. And you mentioned London earlier. So I'm really curious as to how this all fits together in terms of that urban landscape, nature, being outdoors and your coaching work.
Yeah, so there's another side to me that I haven't mentioned yet, and I just drop it in as a bit of a curious point, in that I also am a trained forest therapy guide. So I take groups of people out into nature. Now it's not coaching, it's very, very different, but they blend together beautifully in the way they work. So taking that point on, and then something you mentioned about how much time do we really spend outside? And then I was taking that to the point of, well, we can step outside, but what are we doing when we step outside? So there are loads of experiences, goal-orientated activities that we can do when we're outside. And all of these have incredible benefits to our well-being. But one of the most fundamental things we can do that is going to impact our well-being and has been researched, and there's lots of empirical data now to support such, and it's coming out of the University of Derby, if anyone's interested, from Professor Miles Richardson, and he looks at the 5 pathways to nature connection, and I can put a link on later. But effectively, it's being in nature and then connecting with the nature is really fundamental. So there's little things that we can do, and there's been lots of, there's a randomized clinical trial that's occurred, which is music to my ears because of my history, where they followed over 500 people who were given an app to notice good things in nature over a period of a week. And just by doing that simple activity, their well-being was improved hugely. I can't give you the numbers right now. I think it was about 40%. But more importantly, it was sustained. They checked in a month later and that impact was still being sustained. So that leads me to then explain that it's not just being outside and going for a jog, which is amazing, or doing any sports. It's taking micro moments even to step outside and notice some good things. Maybe it's the rustling of the leaves in the tree. Maybe it's the clouds passing by. Maybe it's you standing on the station waiting for your train and noticing the pigeon life going on, or whatever it is. That's a moment of connecting with nature. And that moment adds up. These micro moments add up into something really very important for us as human beings. So if there is ways where city workers can introduce these micro moments throughout their day, it will go a long way to support them in their intense, screen-orientated, four-walled environments. So there are things you can do on the commute. You can be listening to birdsong or nature-based orientated sounds, which again reduces the kind of inward projection, rumination aspects, and it allows more perspective and more grounding as to before you enter into your work world or you enter back into home world. So just giving yourself an opportunity to take in some nature through your ears. If you've just had a really difficult meeting, something and there's science behind it that can give you a few minutes respite or a few seconds even respite, is by greening your scene so you can look at some nature-orientated pictures, images. Those might be ones you've taken yourself and bring you back to favourite memories of when you've been outside with loved ones or on your own or on adventures. Or it may just be a scene that you've seen and enjoy and can just lose yourself temporarily into that nature-based scene. We all know that we all feel better listening and watching David Attenborough. So David Attenborough on those Blue Planet series, you sit down and you feel comforted. And it's equally important in remembering this for your family and your loved ones. If you do want to calm the situation, allowing your parasympathetic nervous system to come alive, to bring your cortisols down, all your stress hormones down, is to offering yourself these opportunities. Perhaps you can walk outside at lunchtime just briefly and sit on the bench with no other agenda other than to notice the nature around you. a gentle invitation is, what is the pace of nature today? The pace changes every day, yet we never take a moment to notice how nature is moving in any particular moment. And then what am I noticing about myself within this environment? Just some ways. There are many more.
Wow, that's a fascinating brief tour, I suppose, of some of the experiences and insights that you've gained through your work, Sam. And there's loads in there that have got my mind going already. I love this idea of micro moments and just finding those brief opportunities, no matter how brief they are, to connect with nature in some way. And you got me thinking there about how and what ways we could be cultivating our relationship to nature, whether that's listening to a recording of birdsong or whether that's just a brief few minutes outside. And I loved what you said there about noticing the pace of nature, because I think one of the things that often comes up for me in terms of observing nature is that nature has very much got its own timelines for everything. You can't encourage an oak tree to grow faster than it does, for example. It has its own pace and the seasons have their own pace. And I think there is something special that you're touching upon there in terms of our relationship to those cycles and to that pace. And I love this idea. I think what's really coming out of this conversation so far for me is having a more conscious awareness about those things. And then that can be the starting point to further develop and deepen our relationship to those different aspects of nature, but really inviting nature into our lives in a way that supports us and is supportive, perhaps in some of the ways that you were describing earlier from your own experience, Sam. So just going back to some of your own experience, I'm curious, you mentioned there was a period of your life where there was lots of travel, raising a young family. In what ways was nature showing up for you in those days? Was that something you were consciously aware of, or was this something you were developing an awareness of?
That's an interesting question. So when you were speaking earlier and you were talking about how the pace, nature and her seasons, and how the saying came up of, nature's never in a rush, but everything gets done. It's so true. Spring happens, summer happens, the daffodils come and they go. It just fascinates me. And then how has nature supported me during those big, and they were vast transitions? Fundamentally, I think it's been my best friend throughout all of those transitions, in that no matter where I was in the world, there would always be a walk that I could find and that would offer that sense of space and pause and connection. And getting to know the local flora and fauna, being a biologist and an animal behaviorist, it just took me back to who I am. In times where you're trying to make new friends or meet new people or immerse yourself into a community that doesn't necessarily need you. They've all grown up there, or they've all been together a long time. You're just the newbie. You're not necessarily needed. So it was a way of keeping me true, grounded, and consciously aware of myself in the bigger picture of this whole scheme. And there is friendships to be had, relationships to be had. It might sound woo-woo to lots of people that might be listening, but when you start to cultivate that deeper relationship that you were mentioning, it's like any relationship, it's reciprocal. So it goes both ways. And if we can cultivate this sense of belonging and connection and kinship, really, with our environment, then we're much more likely to want to protect and honour and look after those that we love. And so this is where this is really important for all of us. I believe all of us have a connection. Some of us have it at the moment deeper than others, but that is only due to the kind of awareness of how important it is in one's life. And I think we lose it, and there's data also to show us that, we lose this connection. Kids naturally have it. They are happy outside. You see people come alive. You see their imaginations just ignite. But then we tend to lose it. And even more so, I think, possibly with the screen use, from 11 till our early 30s, where some of us reconnect back into that relationship again.
Yeah, I think there's a useful reminder there, Sam, about that journey, particularly for those of us that have children, to be mindful perhaps about our relationship to the outdoors and to nature. I know my kids are very different beings, but I'm glad to say that despite their screen use, we went camping the other weekend and it was lovely just to see them embrace the outdoors and just run around with twigs and just be outside in open fields. And like you say, I think that kids tend to have a very natural relationship. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it, that they do. Their relationship to nature perhaps hasn't been distorted with all of the other distractions that, particularly in this day and age, modern life throws at us. And I can't imagine what it's like to be a young person growing up in this very technical world today. So getting that balance right and leaning into some of those supporting aspects that you described earlier that nature has to offer could be something that, for all of us that have a responsibility of care, could be thinking about on a daily basis in terms of perhaps those tips and ideas that you share with clients about cultivating their relationship to nature, how we could be doing that as responsible carers as well.
I was just thinking carers at both ends, because obviously we've got the kids at one end and then we've got ourselves. And when we do notice that they are engaging in the natural environment and having fun, we need to remember as their role models not to think, oh, okay, they're okay for a moment, I can just answer an email, scroll on my phone, whatever it is, because they're looking round all the time for your engagement. So if they are fully engaged, then get in with them, reconnect to your play and curiosity and wonder and be involved with them. But obviously at the other end of the scale as well, you know, many of us are dealing with elderly parents and are carers in a different capacity, or might have some friends that are needing to be supported in different ways. And I know personally that I've got a colleague that has gone through a traumatic accident and is now, her life has completely changed. Now, the one thing I can offer her when I visit is that I'm determined, come rain or shine, to get her outside and to push her wheelchair around so she gets to experience the breeze on her face and the changing of the seasons and the cheeky squirrel that runs past, and to remember what that feels like. And nature is supporting those experiences all of the way. I just believe that every human, a basic human need, is that connection, because it offers us a sense of recovery and then a sense of restoration. And that can be, if you can't get outside, if you can't literally physically make that happen, then getting to a window and looking out that window with the pure invitation, the simplest of invitations, just to notice what's there. And do it frequently so it becomes like your sit spot or your stand spot, and notice the differences and the changes which is occurring for 5 minutes.
Yeah, some lovely guidance there, Sam. I really appreciate that. And I'm now thinking about those few minutes and those opportunities. I think there's growing research to show even a picture of nature can be really good for our being, our well-being. I'm no scientist myself, but I've heard that it can be really useful in terms of supporting the nervous system and other aspects of our health, just images and, to your earlier point, sounds of nature, Sam. There was something you mentioned earlier that I'd love to learn a little bit more about. You mentioned pausing, and I would love to just gain more of a sense from you about that aspect, because I feel there's something really important there that's probably worth focusing on.
If I have any clients listening to this, they will be shouting, oh, she's going to say the power of the pause, because it is one of the most important, I think, kind of self-awareness tools that anyone can offer themselves in any moment. And by that pause could be a second, a sip of water before you reply as a reaction in a meeting, or it could be an extended period of time. And there's a whole range in between. That pause offers I think, profound choice. You just get more space to choose. And when inside and dealing with a pot plant on your desk, you can use that as your moment of pause to notice the details of the leaf. Or some of us struggle so much to know what to do in a pause. And it's awkward for us. It's challenging to go quiet with no other intention other than just to be in that moment. And that's what nature often offers. It often allows things that we've been pushing down or ignoring to kind of really show itself quickly. And this power of the pause, and I've got a little acronym that I can share with you afterwards, which I've created, which takes us through, each step of the pause. And in there, you can, as I say, make much wiser choices and create much more positive action with intention. It's going to serve you well as those you're serving. Outside, if we were in a session, we might have a natural pause. So as a coaches, we all know the power of the pause in a conversation. If you've asked a question, it's not our job to fill the gap. It's our job to hold that moment, enabling that client to process and then come back with what they need to say in that moment, or that insight that they've just gained even from that silence. And that's supported even more so when you are outside. What you can also use with those moments is the kind of the metaphors that are just everywhere in nature. So there's often, if you're at like a transition in a conversation about maybe something historical, you're in the present and where are you going? Maybe it's a goal orientated type question or session that you're having. What does your future look like? I remember the other day I had a lake beside me. We were in the middle of the crossroads of a pathway, and then onto our right was a beautiful valley. It was like a river valley and horizon. So I was able to kind of ask the client in that moment, tapping into your imagination right now, and the lake is your wisdom, is everything that you've experienced up until this point that we stand. And there is your imaginary kind of future. What do you want to place in that landscape? And you can just play with questioning in that way, which is just slightly different from being in an office environment.
Yes, I think there's a whole other podcast in there just on the metaphors that we can draw from nature alone. So I'm really glad you've inspired us with that point there, Sam. I'm conscious of our time together, and I can't believe how much time has passed already in our conversation today. I've got a few closing questions that I'd love to ask you, Sam, before we wrap up our conversation today. Firstly, is there anything else you feel that we haven't touched upon today that you feel would be a really important idea or thought to share with our listener?
I guess if you're getting really practical now, if you're considering taking your coaching outside, be really willing yourself to be outside, come what may. The biggest thing I can invite anyone to do, and it's quite hard to do, is to trust in the process of coaching that you've been trained in, but then trust in that process outside too. Being pragmatic, make sure you've got things like your insurance covers you inside and outside, that you have a little bit of first aid training, perhaps in case there's a twisted ankle or anything along those sorts of lines, and that you know where you're going. So you've, in a way, have an awareness of the park or the environment that you're in, to know, no matter which way the client chooses, that you know where you're coming back to, so they can relinquish the need to know where their destination is. You take the time, you take the destination, and they are within the moment. They're in that wandering moment where they can just experience being outside with you.
Thanks, Sam. There's some really useful practical tips there. And I know there's been some practical aspects covered already in this series, but I urge anyone listening to this to go and do your research and find out what else you might need in order to carry out any coaching outdoors, and some useful pointers and signposts there in terms of insurance and first aid. So I'm really grateful for that. Thank you, Sam. So Sam, for those that might be new to coaching, or maybe those interested in perhaps even starting their own coaching journey, from the outdoors work that you do, is there anything else practically that you might think might be worth thinking about?
Yeah, so I've mentioned, some of the kind of make sure you've got the right gear on, and your client is, and knowing where you're going. But when it comes to thinking about the session itself and knowing, appreciating that being outside, often insights occur fast in some cases. It's being aware of yourself in maybe some of those more extreme situations, maybe in a coaching scenario where you might need to call on some mental first aid, for instance. I didn't want to embark on the responsibility and privilege of taking these people outside unless I was fully equipped myself, and probably goes back to getting certificate scenario of me. But so I've made sure that I've got mental aid first aid training, and I keep that up to date. I've got 16-hour outdoor first aid training because of my forest therapy aspects of my work, but it plays nicely into this as well. They need to be kept up to date every 3 years or so. Obviously the insurance and everything else, but it's those two things I think are fundamental, particularly when your client might not be, spend a lot of time outside and might find that these insights come to them thick and fast and rapid, and that could be overwhelming and can sometimes lead to anxiety attack or something. So you just need to be ready to hold whatever space is there. And obviously, if this takes you down a route of previous trauma or whatever, it's then considering in that moment and beyond, and having that open conversation with your client. Are we at coaching at the moment, or do we need to engage in some other form of therapy that's going to help you navigate what we've exposed right here, and then come back to coaching? So again, having direct, open, transparent conversations with your client inside and or outside.
Thank you, Sam. One of the questions I love to ask guests towards the end of our conversation in the series is, what's inspired you in the 7 days? But I recognize, Sam, that you've got a lot of experience working with folks outside. So I want to extend that question to you and ask you if there's been any inspirational moments that you may have had with a client, or maybe in the last 7 days.
There was a client, we were on the last of our kind of series. So we'd worked together for 6 months or so. And I think from my perspective, rather than her story and how she'd shifted, it was me just noticing the different being that was showing up from when we first met. The reason it was so profound, I think, was when we were walking and doing her usual circuit. She always chose, and one session would go one way and the other session would go another. And we just got to the corner where she's quite elevated, and she was just quoting back what she'd done in a scenario, how she'd taken the pause, and what she now recognized in herself, and how she was going to apply that moving forwards. And I was just struck by the completely different professional that was before me, and how the language that she was using, and she was the love that she had of the environment that we'd walked. And so she was saying how she's going to bring herself back. She was local, bring herself back and continue with those walks to offer herself the same sense of space, the same sense of self-observation, to go past those familiar trees and landscapes as part of her ongoing practice. Now, I couldn't ask for more than that, really. So that was really inspirational for me to look at her and see all the work that she's done, all that hard work between sessions, and the impact that it's having on her career and her family.
That's a really inspiring example. I got sort of goosebumps there thinking about how we experience the change in somebody's being and their presence through the coaching process and how that has a certain magic of its own. So thank you for sharing that with us, Sam. I'm pretty confident that our listener today might be keen to reach out and connect with you, Sam, to learn more about the wonderful work that you do. So where's the best place to find you online these days, Sam?
I do have an Instagram thing, but it says at Natural Edge Coaching, all one word. My website is www.naturaledgecoachinguk.co.uk. That last little bit of UK is important. But equally, I can just be contacted through my phone numbers on all of those things. My email is present on those. So in any way, shape or form, if anyone wants to just talk and if they want, as you say, some tips on how they might do this themselves or any sort of question around what they've listened to, I'm more than happy to share some time.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you, Rob, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop and increase your coaching expertise.